If you haven't read the book yet, it is a very good read. We're going to be exploring this in some detail. But let me formally introduce him in a sort of embarrassing way. Patrick Grant is an Edinburgh-born fashion icon. Dare I say, close to a national treasure at this point. 2 decades in the fashion industry, grew up in Scotland, school in Barnard Castle. Is that real? The Barnard Castle.
Real? Yeah, it is. Famous, now famous for its eye test.
Well, I'm going to put my glasses on as we speak. Yes.
Yeah, that's where I went to school.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I'd never heard of it before the aforementioned, and now I'm hearing about it all the time. He began running a single shop in Savile Row. Also has a first degree in material science. During his MBA, as catalogued in the book, a friend can't come to lunch, so he starts reading the Financial Times and buys a textile company, which we'll talk about that. That really made me laugh. Patrick has an encyclopedic knowledge of clothing, fashion, cuts, textiles, mills, everything you want to know. And his quiet authority and actual real experience didn't go unnoticed by TV producers. He became the sort of star of a fly-on-the-wall documentary about Savile Row, which I do remember. Really, it was a really good documentary. And then, as we all know, he was taken to the nation's bosom in the Great Sewing Bee. I like somewhere in the book you describe this is the only place you can get an extreme close-up of haberdashery, which I quite enjoyed, which I don't know about you, but that's very much up my street. And now he's here with this banger of a book: scholarship, history, proper information, strategy, explanation. I mean, I absolutely loved it. So I've been thinking about fashion and how awful the mainstream industry is since about 1789, ranting on a daily basis. And this is just a fantastic addition to the conversation with so much real insight and really good strategy. So congratulations on the book. Just a little point. You'll see on the front cover, which I really like, less, a few items, and the trousers I recognise.
It wasn't on purpose. Yeah, they are the same trousers. But as I said to Lucy earlier, it's a rare day when I'm not wearing one or other, or in some cases, at least 3 of the things on that cover. I am a creature of habit, clothes-wise, but yeah, they're all nice things. Talk about all of them in the book, I think.
You do. Yeah. You learn all sorts of things in the book. We learn what you were wearing before you lost your virginity, which I didn't know I was going to read that.
I wasn't
quite
sure
a lot.
Really put it in there. I'm not sure my mum's got to that point in the book yet.
But a very, very good read. So
we remember these things. Do you not remember what you were wearing?
Probably not very much.
Oh, who remembers what they were wearing when they lost their virginity? Yeah, it's good. See,
I can't believe that you actually answered that. You don't have to answer his questions. Okay? Well, quite flustered now. I didn't know we were going to start off with that. I was going to start with a sort of dry analysis of the fashion industry today. But actually, since we're talking about that chapter where you talk about your early interactions with fashion and how you got into it, oh my God, it really made me feel alive again in a way that I do not feel now when I think about fashion. So tell us a little bit about that excitement, that discovery. For you, how did you get into textiles and clothes, and what makes you alive?
I think it's quite an interesting thing to talk about, because I have to remember, and I'm very, very conscious that I'm writing a book that's encouraging people to have, to buy less clothing. I have to remember that as a kid, certainly as a teenager, I really, really liked this stuff, and it was a really important part of who I was being able to buy these things. Now, I also have to point out that, statistically now, we have about 5 times as many pieces of clothing as we did then. I never, as a kid, felt like I didn't have enough clothes, and nor did I feel like they were too expensive or there wasn't enough choice or any of those things. But you know, the point is that what I don't want to be is a kind of killjoy on the whole world of fashion here, because I genuinely love it. And I think there is a part of fashion that is important, and we also happen to be really good at it in this country. And the bit of fashion that I really like and feel like should be allowed to exist is the bit that sort of existed before, which was a bit snobby and elitist, which was that sort of intersection between art and culture and craftsmanship, where, you know, but where people with real talent and something to say about the world express that through collections of clothing that are beautifully produced in a way that makes those objects really valuable to people. And, you know, the bits of clothing that I mention in the book were things that were really important to me and I lived with for a long time. You know, I talk about finding a pair of Vivienne Westwood trousers in Corniche in Edinburgh that I wore until they were utterly worn out. And, you know, they were the big high-waisted stripy pirate trousers. I wore, you know, I had clothes from, I did the same with, I managed to get 3 pairs of Jean-Paul Gaultier jeans, which again, I think 2 of them I've still got. One of them sadly really did die. But everyone borrowed those jeans, including one of my best friends, still best friends, Dave, who really liked them, and he used to wear them on a Friday and I'd wear them on the Saturday. And they were really very cool jeans. But, you know, the pieces of clothing that I had, the bits of fashion that I bought, meant a lot to me because each one had been chosen with real care. And I would go to certain clothes shops. In Edinburgh, there's a shop called Corniche, and that's still there and still run by the same guy that founded it 40 odd years ago. And it sells Westwood, and it sold Catherine Hamnet and Gaultier and Issey Miyake and Yohji Yamamoto and some others, but very, very high-end fashion in a town that where basically everyone either wore their dad's clothes or were a football casual, and then there was like 9 people who shopped at Corniche, and I was one of those. And I would go in on a Saturday and just annoy them by talking to them about the clothes, and occasionally I'd try something on, knowing full well that I couldn't afford it, and then I'd wait until the sale, and then I'd maybe be able to get enough of a bargain that I'd buy one thing. But I kept a lot of that clothing, and then later I moved to Liverpool, and there was a shop called Wade Smith that was the first place in Liverpool to get Prada, and it was really exciting.
What year would that have been around?
That was the 1995.
Yeah.
Justine worked at Wade Smith.
We have a mutual friend
who now is a natural dyer. But she was one of those people who I annoyed the hell out of every Saturday by going in and trying on the same thing over and over and over again, and maybe buying one thing at the end of the season in the sale. But there was a very different attitude, and most of the rest of the clothing I bought, I would tear pages out of the magazines like Elle and Vogue that had quarterly menswear sections. This was before British GQ or British Esquire or any of the British men's fashion mags. There were no men's, when I was a kid, there were no men's fashion magazines. There were just quarterly sections in, I think Evening Standard had occasional menswear features, but I would pull the pages out and pin them on the wall, and then I would go to a shop called Flip of Hollywood, another called Armstrong's, and I would spend 8 hours trying to find just the right jacket that looked like that jacket that was in that thing, and I would put together these outfits. But there was a real sense of, also there was a sense of hard work paying off when you found a good thing. And again, you know, some of those clothes I've still got, and certainly some of the clothes that I bought in the mid-90s at Wade Smith, I've still got. Lots of them I've still got. I mean, a lot of them are just really nice pieces of knitwear from, you know, Prada and Tom Ford's era of Gucci and all that sort of stuff. But quality was everywhere in everything that I bought, and that has sort of carried through. But I feel like we have to be very, very careful about trying to put a dampener on young people's interest in clothing, because it is just a natural part of a lot of people. But I think it's the grown-ups that have to take responsibility for buying a lot less, and maybe just let the kids have fun for a few years and
Yeah.
do it that way.
Yeah. Actually, just on the place in Liverpool, when Justine explained to me about it, I thought you worked there because you were there so much. Okay, so we've got a sense of your sense of style. Did you ever get seduced by fast fashion or ever think, oh, actually, this is a democratization of style, which is kind of useful and helpful?
Well, I mean, I think there was a point in time at which there's a great exhibition at the Museum of London Docklands that talks about the sort of era of the emergence of fast fashion in London. It talks about Chelsea Girl and these kind of brands that were, I think, were an exciting and important and useful part of British culture, and the ability, having the ability to buy something new that felt exciting and fun at a sort of affordable price, I think was probably arguably a good thing. I mean, it has led, it sort of opened the door for a direction of travel that nobody doing that at the time could have really foreseen. I don't think anybody, you know, who worked at Chelsea Girl in the 60s could have imagined that Shein was one day going to launch 2,000 new products a day, and they were all going to be, you know, £2.86 and made of plastic. But I think there was some good in that, and it was democratic, and it did stop fashion from being elitist, but it sadly did start us in this on this road. The problem, of course, is not consumers. I was at a meeting. Does anyone here work for Marks and Spencer's? I was at a meeting with Marks and Spencer's the other day. I had a big rant about Marks and Spencer's, and then I had a meeting with them about 3 days later. It's a bit embarrassing, but they were saying that, you know, there was criticism of them for kind of lowering the quality of their clothes, and their view was it was the consumer's fault.
Well, that's standard retail.
It is standard retail, but I don't think it is the consumer's fault, because I think you can't blame the consumer for being enticed by incredibly enticing stuff. You know, one of the big arcs in the book, there are sort of 3 strands in the book, and one of them is an attempt to sort of plot the whole history of our consumption and our, you know, consumptive behavior. And it's quite interesting to plot that arc right back to the very beginning, because there is a very definite point at which, as a society, we go from deliberately suppressing consumption. You know, we were told that as individuals we shouldn't be envious, we shouldn't be greedy, we should live within our means. That was the godly thing to do, and it was the moral and religiously correct thing to do. And then the rich work out that if we buy more shit, they all get richer. And that's the point at which all of that stuff gets thrown in the bin, and it's like, right, crack on, you buy loads of stuff. I mean, there were literally laws against us buying stuff. You know, there were sumptuary laws that said you can't buy this or that, or you have to, you know, you can't wear pointy shoes unless you've got this much money, or whatever it happens to be. There's a load of this mad stuff. But there is a point at which, and it's, you know, it's the point at which we realise that in economics, you know, markets are elastic. Supply and demand is elastic, and you know, you can create more demand, you can create more production, and the whole thing will just continue forever. And it was at that point that everybody thought, right, well, let's just get them buying stuff and we'll see what happens. And of course, it started off relatively benign and quite small scale, but the only direction that business will move, because that is how most businesses in the world are set up, is to move in the direction of increasing their profit. Because, you know, almost all businesses in the world are set up that way. You know, if you are a publicly traded company, it is 99.999% likely that your greatest objective as an officer of that company is to increase the profit of that business so that you increase the returns to your shareholders. That's how it works in most places now. Didn't used to be that way, and it used to be the case that a lot of business obviously was privately run and was run in a way that was entirely at the behest of the person that owned it. If I want to carry on running my business just making enough money that we can all tick along in a nice way without artificially, you know, making people buy more stuff, then that was up to me. But today, that's not the case. And so, sadly, the inevitable consequence of that sort of opening of that door is that consumption has to rise. And in order for the continuation of the rise of, in volume of consumption, you have to decrease the price, which means you have to decrease the quality. And lo and behold, that's exactly what's happened. And we've seen a sort of steady increase in the rate of acceleration of this consumption. And over the past 20 years, I would say, and I think really the big tipping point came with online fast fashion businesses, the birth of ASOS and their ilk. That was the start, I think, of a really serious acceleration, partly because the cost models of those businesses were so radically different to bricks and mortar businesses. All of a sudden, they had about a third extra money to play with, to use for marketing, because they didn't have to pay for shops and staff. That money they used very effectively to start us buying more stuff in a very, very clearly coercive way. This is the start of them paying influencers. This is the start of a very rapid increase in both the frequency and the effectiveness of the marketing that a lot of us don't understand is happening to us all the time, but many of us are conscious of it. In every corner of our life, we are being sold stuff at almost every opportunity now. And I was on this morning, the other week, talking about the book with Kat Deely, who had read it and quite liked it. And then the following day...
She's a big reader, Kat Deely, yeah.
But then the following day, there was Kat Deely's list of all the clothes she was wearing that week. Part of trying to get people to buy more stuff. I'm not criticising Kat particularly for it. Everybody does it.
Yeah. I think a lot of presenters do it, don't they? Because they get so many questions.
Oh, well, they get so many questions. Well, they do. People ask.
Lawyer, so,
but people... they do,
But do people ask you what you're wearing on?
Well, they can ask. It's the same stuff. It's on the front of the book.
So I think the book, you do a really successful job of unmasking some of our consumerist tendencies back into our DNA and our, foremothers and forefathers. But it also made me realise that we have such... You kind of pinpoint, and I think you just spoke about it, the point at which we start this hypocrisy, this schism, where maybe our ancestors were going to church on a Sunday and being told not to consume, and then all the other messages are like, consume, consume, consume. And then we go through this speeding up of fashion or clothing creation, the spinning jenny and all the rest of it. And then you've got people writing to the landed gentry, writing to the Times and complaining that their housemaids are spending all their money on clothes, on dresses. And you start to see the nuts and bolts that make up consumer society today. And then, of course, when we come out of COVID or after an economic crash, we are told it is our duty to consume to get the economy working again. And if you listen to, Radio 4 like I do, if you mainline Radio 4, those business reports where they just talk about how much people have spent in Marks and Spencer and their share price, it drives me mental, because really, is that all there is to say? And it really also made me realise...
It's interesting because that has become the be-all and the end-all of all economic conversation.
Yes.
We have all forgotten that actually businesses could exist to do good for all of us, rather than exist to do good for their investors and their shareholders and others. We have, there are lots of different forms of capitalism. I was one of the things that I found most interesting when I did my MBA was this explanation that not everybody's form of capitalism is the same. Ours is like America's, and America's is the worst, And again, when you look back at... if you're an investor and you want to make money, it's better. But if you're an ordinary citizen who wants to live a good life in a society that's, equal and free and has great opportunities for all, then it definitely isn't the right form of capitalism. But, we went on that path, and then, in the late 1950s, early 1960s, a sort of even more extreme version of that started to be discussed. And then, obviously, Thatcher and Reagan took that neoliberal idea of business and ran with it full tilt. And we haven't turned away from that at all. Whereas lots of other countries do have different variations of capitalism. And guess what? None of them are failing. You know, they're all doing fine. You know, you look at France or Norway or Germany or Italy or Costa Rica or others, they've all got very different forms of overriding social and economic construct, but they're all fine. We've just chosen ours, and we are all now living with the consequences of that. And the other really sad thing is that places like India and China are being encouraged to follow that same model, which is going to only exacerbate the problem if you see consumption as a problem.
Yeah, and given its links to the climate and nature crisis and where we are in that, you know, this becomes an existential problem. So what is it in you that makes you test your theory to this degree? So I want to go back to the thing I mentioned before. So what year was it you were doing your MBA at Oxford?
2003.
2003, you're meeting someone for lunch in the refectory or whatever, they can't come, so you just pick up the newspaper, which is the Financial Times, and go to the classifieds, and before you know it, you've bought a failing British manufacturing business.
Yeah, very small one, luckily, and quite compact one. No, I worked in manufacturing all of my life. As Lucy said, I did a degree in material science and engineering. My degree was all about how you make things, what you make them from, how you make an object to do its job incredibly well, to do its job in a way that gives enjoyment to the user in whatever way or shape that takes, and to do it for a really, really long time. That was, you know, and there's a section about quality in the book, a big section about quality, because I think, you know, I've always been fascinated by what you make things from, how you make them, and how that translates into the quality of the object and our, you know, the chairs we're sitting on, the clothes we're wearing, everything that we surround ourselves by, you know, has an impact on how we live, and has an impact on our happiness, and has an impact on society and jobs and lots of things. And, you know, it's taken me 30 odd years to kind of link all those things up in my mind, but I was always fascinated by making good stuff. You know, I talk about a book that I had as a kid called How It's Made, and which I was fascinated with. You know, the ins and outs. It's like, how do you make a tennis ball? You know, like just odd stuff. But so as a kid, I was interested in really well-made things. You know, I would always be that. You know, I was the guy in my friendship group who would save for 6 months for one pair of trousers, whereas my other friends would buy something all the time, and they were all a bit rubbish, and that's why they look bad all the time, and I look great. But you know, all of that. I was obsessed with. I really, really liked clothes. I liked clothes. I particularly liked tailored clothes. My dad's wardrobe was relatively small, but what he had was lovely quality stuff that he took great care of. And I also really liked the stories of manufacturing businesses and brands. You know, as a kid in Edinburgh, this was the period when Pringle and Lyle and Scott and Barbour and Burberry and Aquascutum and all these brands were being worn by the football casuals. And, you know, I grew up surrounded by all of that stuff. And so if you sort of drew a Venn diagram of all the stuff that I was most interested in, Savile Row would be right in the middle of it. And then I came across an advert in the back of the paper that was flogging a Savile Row tailor. And I sort of couldn't believe that it was real. And then it turned out that it was real, and so I bought it. But at the time, all I was interested in was just trying to nurse this lovely old business back to health. It wasn't, I didn't have ambitions of any of this other stuff that's happened since. It was just about taking this lovely business that did something really beautiful and trying to make sure that it stayed alive and remained relevant and provided, you know, the jobs that it provided and kept the skills going and all of that.
What did your classmates on your MBA make of this decision?
I mean, most of them are still laughing for the other side of their 7 noughts paychecks, but no, they mostly actually thought it suited me quite perfectly. And certainly old friends were like, oh yeah, this sounds right up your street. That's exactly, I can't believe you haven't been doing this all this time, sort of thing. And my granny was really supportive, and my mum thought I was bonkers. And maybe still does, no, she doesn't. But no, I think it felt like, I didn't know anything about running a clothing business. I had worked at Gap as a student, so I was very good at folding T-shirts.
Yeah, it's been very good.
And doing that upselling bingo that they used to do. Anyone else here work at Gap ever? Yes. I mean, I loved Gap. In the 80s and 90s, Gap clothing was fantastic.
How long did you work there for?
Oh, just like 1 year as a student.
My flatmate managed 2 days.
2 days. Well, I beat that. Yeah, beat that. Yeah. They did this thing where you had little prizes and I was quite good at it.
Yeah.
That was it. I didn't have a grand plan. I just thought Norton & Sons is a lovely thing, and and it was failing, and it was in a voluntary arrangement with the receivers, and it was losing a bunch of money, and I just thought, look, I'm just going to try and nurse this thing back to health. And I think the interesting thing about Norton & Sons is everything that was important to me at Norton & Sons is also important to me at Community Clothing, although they are at completely opposite ends of the kind of price spectrum. Well, not completely opposite ends, because there is cheaper stuff than Community Clothing, but at Norton's, we use the best materials we can. They are mostly materials that come from just up the road. They are exclusively natural materials. Most of the things that go into the clothes themselves are also natural materials: horsehair canvases, linen canvases, cotton canvases. We sew with silk thread. There's very little. Our linings are synthetic because silk linings rot really quickly, and so a synthetic lining arguably is better for the planet because it lasts way, way longer. But maybe I'm not so clear on that now. But we only made what was needed. So, we don't produce collections. We're not encouraging people to buy more every season by showing them new things. We're just there. If you need something, here we are. We make in a way that uses almost no power because it's largely hand sewn. And then we look after those clothes for the lifetime of them, which in some cases is really long. I mean, I still get bits of clothing coming back to Norton's that are 50 plus years old. I've had bits of clothing that are 70 plus years old that still are beautiful and very wearable, and that's good. The only problem with Norton & Sons is it's $6,000 a suit, and that wipes it out for most people. But the fundamentals of it are the same throughout everything that I've done. So Norton & Sons, Andy Torts, and even when I worked at Debenhams, it was still trying to make good clothes that lasted well, that weren't overly cyclical. We did 2 collections a year, and a lot of what we did was pretty much the same stuff year after year, although they did weirdly always want to change things for no reason at all, which drove me nuts. But the idea with Community Clothing is really simple. We make really good quality, long-lasting clothing. We're called clothing for a very specific reason, and we are trying to make things the best way we can, make sure that the people that make them are well looked after, well rewarded, and they love these jobs. I mean, we work with some brilliant, brilliant factories, many of whom are multi-generational, several of whom are at least a couple of centuries old, some are even older than that. And they all form an incredibly important part of the economy and also the sense of identity of the towns in which they are based. We work in, I think it's about 35 different towns, because in certain towns we've got multiple factories. But the importance of those jobs, again, I talk about, and there was going to be a slightly longer bit in the book where I talked about moving to Blackburn and living in a bed and breakfast and with a bunch of HND car mechanic apprentices for a while. But it's
a documentary.
Thankfully, Thankfully, my very wise editor thought we can truncate that chapter a little bit. But the important thing about going to Blackburn, so I bought a clothing factory in 2015.
I wanted to explain actually, because I didn't set that up properly. That yes, after the classified ad and buying the Savile Row thing, he did it again. So
yeah.
that was that. I really like the way into this in the book actually. So 2016, you're asked to basically consult on a knitwear factory, and you go and check it out, and it didn't pan out. But you had something in your head. What you'd worked out was that if you got UK school kids wearing woolen jumpers, you could re-employ every person who'd lost their job in Scottish knitwear. And that's what it takes for you, isn't it? It's a calculus that you do, and then you're right. That's how that was the genesis of community clothing, which became a social enterprise.
Well, it was set up originally as a CIC, but now it's just a company limited by shares. But we've got a very clear social purpose. Right. It always amazes me that CEOs are paid so much money because, frankly, their job is really easy. Somebody comes to them and says, we can do this or we can do that. And their question is always, well, which one makes more money? And somebody's made a calculation and they say, right, well, we're going to do that then. That is how difficult it is to be the CEO of a large company. Like, you're just going where the money is, and that's not really that hard. Our decision-making is different. Our decision-making primarily is what action which of these actions will lead to the creation of the most good work. It's just a different way of operating the business. Now, we have to be profitable, because otherwise we will stop, but our intention is always to create the most value through creating work, and that's the way that we are a social business. But it was absolutely right. I did a back of the fag packet calculation about jumpers and knitters, and I did the same calculation recently about pants and whales, not the animal in the sea, but the country.
Tell us.
Yeah, so there's a really long, when the coal mines closed in South Wales, obviously the economy was murdered. I mean, it was disastrous for those economies. And in the 1970s, when this was happening, there was at least an attempt at a plan by government to shore up those lost jobs with new jobs, and so money was put into those regions where coal mines were being closed. And one of the things that happened was that a lot of underwear manufacturing grew up in the Welsh valleys north of Cardiff, and in that region there were in the early 90s there were 6 really big underwear factories making undies for everybody from Marks and Spencer's at one end to Gossard and the Wonder Bra at the other end. And there were 6 big factories that employed about 2,000 people, almost all of whom were women. So this was an incredibly important industry to that region. And then it all went. And again, I did another one of these calculations where I worked out that if 5% of the British population bought their pants from people making them in Wales, you could re-employ every single one of those 2,000 people that had lost their jobs, which doesn't seem like a very big ask, actually. Also, they will be better quality pants. They'll last a lot longer. You won't have to, who knows Judy Love, the comedian? Yeah, so I met Judy. I went, Kyle, who's now the new presenter of Sewing Bee. Kyle took me to Judy Love in Leeds. She was playing at Leeds Varieties, and afterwards we had a long conversation about pants. And I'd seen her doing a thing. I've seen her doing a thing about pants, but I hadn't realised how bad people's pants were. Just in the same way, I hadn't realised how bad people's socks were until I had to wear some M&S socks on Sewing Bee. I'm like, what are these? But it's
where do you get your socks from?
Well, these socks,
everyone got them from M&S.
Socks are made by Corgi in Ammanford in South Wales. These are actually e-taught socks, but I only wear my own socks. So I either wear now,
Well, if you've got
these,
socks,
these are probably about 9 or 10 years old, these socks, and have probably been worn once a fortnight in all. I mean, this is the thing people don't realise. Socks shouldn't be shit. Like, you can buy socks that will last 100 wears quite easily. But most people are buying socks. The M&S socks that they got me, I did a thing for the Christmas special where I had to dress as a bottle of wine. Does anybody remember? It was just at the end of, it was just after Boris and his lot had done all that wine and cheese party in Downing Street, and we recorded this thing ages ago. I'm dressed as a bottle of wine, and Esme's dressed as a piece of cheese, and it was literally the week that all that wine, and we were like patting ourselves on the back. But
You got
I
past
had to wear black leggings and black socks and my black school shoes, but I didn't have any black socks because I never really wear black socks. So one of the runners had nipped out to M&S and got me like the autograph socks. And
they got you the posh ones.
They got me the posh ones. They were £5 a pair, and I put them on, and they were horrible. And I thought, is this how have Marks and Spencer's from, because I wore Marks and Spencer's socks for the first 20 years of my life, and they were brilliant, and now they're shit.
Could we just drill into that? Why were they so bad?
Thin.
Why were they so irksome?
Well, to be honest, I don't wear tights very often, but I've occasionally, they felt to me like tights. They were thin and sort of placky feeling, and they were flabby, and then I washed them, and they obviously, when you make socks, if you make good socks, you launder those, you wash those socks just like you wash a jumper before they go out. So they shrink them into shape, and you make sure they're right. That final washing stage is quite expensive, so most cheap socks are not pre-washed before you sell them, and that's just to save money. So these, when I washed them, they look, I mean, I'm not going to say what they looked like, but they looked like just a floppy, thin, sort of plasticky thing. And they felt horrible on my feet. And I thought, well, what is this what everybody wears now? And the truth is, no, because these are the good ones. People are wearing much worse socks than that.
Yeah.
And, our socks are £6, and these ones are now £5.50.
I love that you're having to go at Marks and Spencer's, by the way.
Because they're not. I mean, to be honest, Marks and Spencer's hung on in there for quality longer than most. But what really annoys me about them now is that they still say they stand for quality and value, and the quality part of that is an outright nonsense.
In my experience, having interviewed a lot of people about sustainability in fashion and people who've been involved in manufacturing in the UK and the last remnants of it, they often tell me that M&S and their insistence on standardisation killed quite a lot of British production. So I do hear this a lot.
I mean, yes. I mean, it was interesting. There was a. Well, I think we're slightly going off topic here. There was an event at Downing Street a couple of weeks ago with British manufacturers and British brands, a sort of meet and greet, like we didn't know who we all were anyway. But the Prime Minister's wife wanted to have a little shindig, but M&S didn't show up, and I am fairly certain it's because almost every one of those manufacturers in that room had been screwed over by M&S at one point. We certainly had been, and I know at least 2 others in the room. I've stood up in public, and anyway, but we're not here to slam M&S.
No, well, you've already done that quite completely.
Because I'm trying to do something with them that will encourage them back in the right direction.
Okay, well, let's talk.
It's not necessarily.
Let's talk about that direction, because I've realised that we haven't mentioned the S word at all, which is sustainability.
Yes.
What does that word mean to you? Do you use it, and would you describe your approach as sustainable?
Well, I think I probably would. I think fundamentally, to me, it means creating a system of an industrial system that is endlessly circular in a way that causes no harm. That, to me, is what it's all about. And it doesn't. I think at the moment there are lots and lots of people who are using the S words as an excuse to make people feel okay about continuing to consume the same quantity of stuff as before. And certainly, I mentioned a conversation that I had with the former chairman of H&M over a dinner in Dumfries House, and we were talking about sustainability, and we had a long and quite good conversation about it, and certainly H&M have invested a certain amount of money in trying to find better ways to do some of what they do. But the point is, it doesn't really matter because their business model is sell you more stuff you don't need every week. Mm-hmm. And we had that conversation, and he said, well, what would you do? And I said, well, if you really cared about the planet, you'd shut it all down. And he said, what am I going to do with all my people in Sweden where, they are the second biggest employer in Sweden? And I said, well, you've got 28 billion quid. You could give them all some money to do something that doesn't kill the planet. I say this flippantly, but I didn't say it flippantly at the time. And, he hasn't done that. Surprise, surprise. But the point is, all of that stuff that they're doing, there are some very, very well-meaning scientists and there are some very, very well-meaning people within those businesses that do genuinely care. Of course they care. They care as much as we do, I'm sure, and some of them I've met, and they're really into it. But the point is, we can't tech our way out of this problem. The problem is that and this is the thing that I think everybody who's in the fashion world and everybody who invests in the fashion world has to realize, that fashion is not a necessity. We need food, we need power to live our lives. There are certain things in life that we do need, but we do not need to change our clothes all the time. Certainly not at the whim of an industry who is profiting from that. And it was interesting to me to think about just how new this idea of fashion is. The idea that you would artificially create new clothes that would encourage people to change their clothes is a really relatively recent phenomenon. It started with Charles Worth in Paris less than 150 years ago. And of course, then it was actually Worth, I think, did 4 collections a year, but latterly it was mostly just 2 a year. But then it became monthly drops, and then it became weekly drops, and now, of course, you're in the situation where it's daily drops. And even, Shein is the most ridiculous example of that. But everybody else, Boohoo, Zara, H&M, Primark, others, they are all putting new stuff in their shops every day. Every day.
Same system. That's why I don't like those league tables about who's slightly better than the other one, because same system, guys. So I need to take some of your questions as well. I'm being very selfish and asking on my own. But just before that, this is a big question. So this book is so packed full of detail, and you really get that sense of fashion history, economic history, how it all fuses together. You talked just now about some of where we've got to, and this rapid consumption and Shein and all the rest of it. Do you think we can reverse out of this? Do you think there's something within us that can draw us back and save us from completely setting fire to our own fashion culture? And in the arc of things, where is your place in it with what Sewing Bee has done? Because it's huge. I can't, when people knew that I was going to meet you tonight, loads of people sent me emails going, tell Patrick that he's got me sewing again, or he's got me thinking about consumption in a different way. It's had such a huge effect. So where are we on that cusp?
I think we are at a very interesting point in our sort of consumptive evolution. I think we, if you lined all citizens up in this country, there would be at one end a quite small group of people who knew that they needed to do things differently and had taken the steps to make that a reality. And then you've got a slightly bigger group of people who know that they should do it and haven't done it yet. And then you've got a really, really surprisingly large group of people, because I think when we have these conversations, we assume that most people are like us. But there are a lot of people who know but just don't care. And then there's a really even bigger group of people who just don't even know it yet. And I feel like there is only one direction of travel, and that is towards understanding and action. you know, we will eventually, through the, you know, the continued amplification of this story and the education that we all get in this field, more and more of us will be aware. You know, it is becoming increasingly difficult to avoid conversations about the badness of fashion and the badness of consumption generally. So we are all becoming aware. How quickly we move in that direction is really the kind of key crux of it. But I cannot imagine us getting to a point in time where we think, you know what, let's have more shit plastic clothes and more poverty wages, and, you know, we'll go back in that direction a bit. I can't see anybody taking that step. So we are going in the right direction, it's just how fast we go there. But increasingly, there are things that are happening that I think are culturally interesting. I think there are increasing number of people, quite a lot of young people actually, who are making it cool to sort of say F off to the whole consumption system. They're saying, I am not going to buy any new clothes at all for a year or 6 months or even a month. And there are others who were saying, you know, and I meet people a lot who say this, I'm only buying secondhand. And I think there's an interesting, the second challenge in Sewing Bee is always about making something old out of something new, and which was something that was very routinely done until about 50 odd years ago, until clothes got so cheap that it didn't really make sense to be salvaging, you know, the cotton from a blouse and turning it into a kid's outfit or whatever it was. But we're rediscovering, that feels really good. It feels really good in a sort of mindfulness way, but it also feels culturally good because we know that we're actually doing something that's great for the planet. But also now I've been looking at a very significantly increasing number of designers leaving some of the top fashion colleges are producing collections that are made out of old stuff, which is absolutely new. I think it's really only in the last 2 or 3 years that I've seen it start to happen. And there's a lady called Bethany Williams who I've known for a while. And I think she was one of the earliest people in this. I remember doing a collection in 2019, so obviously we did it in 2018, where we took a load of old white shirts and cut them all up and reconstituted fabric and made lots of pieces for the collection from that. But that was, you know, that was 5 years ago, and that felt like we were sort of early on in that path. And I only did that because I was doing it on Sewing Bee, and I was seeing how interesting it was. But this year on Sewing Bee, 2 contestants in week 1 made to measure challenge garments out of old found textiles, even though they weren't asked to. You know, I brought in this week called Reduce, Reuse, Recycle, where every challenge is done with old stuff, which is a sort of move on from that second challenge. And now it's starting to just trickle in. And of course, the interesting thing about making things from old things is it takes more skill and it takes more creativity, and therefore it is more satisfying. And you know, it is the start of, I think the other interesting thing is that lots of young people are selling their clothes on Vinted, and they are discovering that if they're trying to flog secondhand Primark, Shein, whatever, no one wants it. So actually, people are discovering the value of better quality clothes through their attempts to monetize it, which I think is a really important thing as well. And I was speaking at a conference in Glasgow last year about circularity in fashion. And in this country, we're really, really good at textile recycling. We've got a very advanced... So by textile recycling, we mean sorting out and reselling. There is no recycling, by the way. There is no... All attempts to recycle second-hand synthetic clothes so far have proven unsuccessful in an economic...
Textile to textile.
Textile to textile. Take an old piece of clothing and, you know, dissolve it and reconstitute the material and make something new from it. That doesn't happen. The business that H&M actually invested in failed a month ago, which was sad, I think. And but we used to take our clothes, and we have a very sophisticated network of sorting centres in this country, and the clothes are sorted into 200 grades. And the top grades stay here. Charity shops take them, second-hand clothing shops take them. The good stuff, the stuff that's made of pure wool, pure cotton, linen, the good brands, the designer brands. Next tier down, we'll go to Eastern Europe and other countries that would, you know, so actually things like Marks and Spencer's labels still sell in Eastern Europe.
Oh, it has a lot of cachet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the rest of it used to be sent to sub-Saharan Africa. And the head of the Textile Recycling Association told me April last year, that stopped. They have had enough of our second-hand shit. And there is already far too much of this stuff there. So literally, in his words, no one on the planet wants second-hand Primark. There is no value. It is just literally rubbish. Once you buy it, it has no value at all to anyone on the planet anywhere. And I think people are, through things like Vinted, are finally, like when it actually means you can make a bit of money, it's starting to ring bells.
And I honestly, I know I'm just cheerleading this book, but the chapter on quality I just found astonishing. Like, I think if people knew that and grasped that as a central conceit, they would think about it differently. And the false economy, actually, that you're describing. Does anyone else have a question for Patrick?
Please. Oh, good.
Yeah. Oh, yes. This lady here, and then we'll go to the lady in red. Oh, you've got a microphone. We don't really need them, but no one. Thank you.
Hello. You've spoken about marketing spend. You gave a talk at my university about 5-6 years ago, and you said that you don't spend any money on marketing. And I wondered how that's gone, and if you think that it's applicable to the rest of the industry, and if you think it could be taken up.
Yeah, I think at the time, 5 years ago, so community clothing is 8 years old. 5 years ago, we really, really were spending nothing. I remember a year. The last couple of years we've spent a little bit more, but I remember a year, maybe 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, where we spent 347 quid in the entire year on all of our marketing. That includes the photography, the models, the stuff, any paid. There was no paid at all. My view is, this is what I find really interesting, is that most people would I think, admit that they would happily buy good quality clothes at good prices. Mm-hmm. And there are good quality clothes, but they're all expensive. And there are affordable clothes, but they're all rubbish. So what we've done is something that used to be quite common, is we sell good quality clothes at good prices. And that's quite a compelling piece of marketing. Anyone here do anything to do, like business? There are 4 Ps of marketing. It's quite boring stuff, actually, but it weirdly still makes sense. A century on in business world, 4 Ps of marketing: product, price, place, and promotion. Product is how good your product is. Is it any good? Price is, can people afford it? Place is, where do you sell it? And promotion is the marketing. Most businesses today in fashion only do the promotion. I mean, the place is everywhere. If you're selling online, you're everywhere. But it used to be, can we get it into Selfridges? That's like the place bit. But effectively, all modern fashion businesses only do that 4th P, which is promotion, because the product is of absolutely no importance to them at all. When have you ever seen any of these fast fashion businesses talk about the quality of what they sell? Nobody ever mentions it. We just do the first 2. We do product and price. And that sets us weirdly in a totally different world from everybody else. So if you look at our website, and I talk about it a bit on the book, there are still lots of brands that sell on the basis of quality. Quite a lot of them I've named in a directory in the book. People like Tricker's shoes, who I love. When I was writing the book, because I was thinking, how I think the problem is very few of us have had much of an education in what the quality of clothes sort of should be. Yeah. Partly because we're surrounded by so much fairly poor quality clothing. But I thought, how do you go to the website and you look at the website, and if the brand, Shein would never talk about quality or anything to do with their product at all. It's just, but Trickers, you go to their website, and there's a video that clicked in when I wrote the book, and the first thing the video says is, we just make really good shoes, or something like that. And it's like, not many businesses talk about that. There are businesses like Trickers who make really good product, but it's relatively expensive. I mean, it is great value, but it's relatively expensive. So my feeling is, we don't have to work that hard on that fourth P because we get the first two Ps right. I mean, we do a bit. We talk about it. We talk about it like I'm talking about it now. I mean, this is promotion, but fundamentally, we are a business that runs on the basis that we think that if people find something that's good and the price is good, they'll keep buying it. And that's absolutely what we found. I mean, our business, we're still quite a small business, but we have grown. I mean, we're on quite a steep growth at the moment. It's not massive. I mean, we're less than 3 million turnover. We'll be less than 3 million turnover this year. But all of our turnover is through our own website, and it's, because our prices are quite affordable, quite low, we put a lot of work through the factories that we work with, and we count the number of hours that we create, and we've created well over 1/3 hours of work in the UK. But that's the stuff that gets people coming, because I mean, actually, what gets people coming is they buy our socks and they put them on and they go, these are really good socks, and then they buy our t-shirts and our pants and our things,
Okay,
and
I think
the sock is the gateway
I
drug.
think we've had a lot of promotion of the sock this evening. Thank you. Okay, thank you. Very good question.
Thank you.
Yes.
It's a question for both of you. Big fan. I want to know, how do you do it intentionally? Is there a recipe to learn from of how you're both really good at explaining these awful problems to people, but without them getting defensive or polarized or closing off, especially with people who are new to it and people of all different political persuasions? How do you both do it so well?
I don't think I do it very well because I'm
I
always
think you
arguing
do.
with people.
Well, I mean, you made the most incredible film about it, which I'm assuming most of you have seen. If you haven't, you need to watch it. Which was the most incredible wake-up call for a lot of people. But I'm 52, and I've learned, and I think part of also working on Sewing Bee, and also living and working in Blackburn, I'm very lucky. I get to talk to a lot of people. I get to meet and talk to a lot of people, and I do understand that I'm in a relatively privileged position to have the knowledge that I have, and not everybody has enjoyed the same access to information that I have. In fact, most people haven't, because I remember Joe Lycett, who is a very smart man, saying to me during the filming of the second series, and I think I mentioned somewhere in the book, but Joe says to me, having Esme and I having spent a whole season banging on about fashion, and Joe in the end ended up doing this a massive, brilliant expose of Boohoo called Poohoo, which was revolting but brilliant. Joe says to me, "What's polyester?" And I'm like, "Well, it is a fair question," and I think you just have to remember that lots of people have different economic imperatives. There are a lot of people in this country who really, really do not have the luxury of being able to do what I'm talking about, which is buy one good thing instead of 5 cheap things, because actually they cannot get over that financial hurdle. But also, it's not anybody's fault that they haven't got the information that I've been privy to over all these years, because I did a degree in material science. I studied polymer science at university. Like, I understand this stuff in a way that a lot of people don't. But also, I've been working in this industry, and I've got an open mind, and I've worked on all sides of it. I've worked for Debenhams, I've worked for Norton & Sons, and now I work with all of these amazing factories in the UK. But also, I've lived in Blackburn and seen the economic downside of all of our changes in consumptive behaviour absolutely firsthand. And I had lived in Edinburgh, nice middle-class, wealthy city. I'd lived in Leeds, Manchester and Liverpool, all cities that have been through a massive economic regeneration. And I lived in Oxford and I lived in London. And that meant I was insulated from really first-hand experience of the damage that our choices in the way we consume has made. And that was a real wake-up for me. And so I think you have to just be cognizant that everybody, not everybody is working with the same information. And also, not everybody, but I would say the great majority of people are good and kind and well-meaning. And everybody would like to make the right choice, but it's just a question of information and possibly economic imperative.
Yeah, and I think my job is slightly different. I see my job as holding the line with the brands and the manufacturers and maybe doing the investigative bit a bit further up, because I just see people being lied to all the time. And particularly, so Rana Plaza, which you mentioned in the book, and then Primark after that, a lot of my colleagues, whenever they wrote a story about it, would put in the thing from the Primark press office. We were first on the scene, we gave this much compensation. You will never find a piece where I use it, ever. And that may sound like a really small rebellion, but that's how I hold the line. And it's those bastards that I take on because I see them as where the issue is. I try not to get into it with just people going about their daily lives and having to, like people, we have food deserts, we have retail deserts as well. So, I know people who have to get stuff from weird catalogue things because that's all that they can afford and it's all that is available to them. So I make no judgment on that. In a slide to a low-wage economy, this is the choice that people have. I want to stop the slide to the low-wage economy. That's how I see it. So that's probably why I'm not very good at explaining it, because that's where my fightiness comes out. Okay, let's try and get a few more questions in. We've done this side. We should, yes, this, yeah.
Related to yours, and it's back to Shein. You can hear me, back to Shein, who were on Radio 4 on the business program a couple of weeks ago. Hey, yay, Shein might list in London. Wow, that's great, that's great. And they were asked about this on Radio 4, and they're saying, wow, a big listing in London, and I'm sure they'll adhere to all of the regulatory requirements. And then they moved on. That was it. And there wasn't any pushback because they're talking about access to a London listing, jobs, cheap clothes.
And they're doing the same. They want a US IPO. That's what they want.
I think it's really, really interesting because at the same time that Jeremy Hunt was flying to China to try and convince Shein to list in London, France is saying we're going to try and ban Shein, effectively. And that is absolutely telling. I think there are a number of interesting things here. In the last 20 years, the pace of growth and domination and decline in fast fashion businesses has accelerated so rapidly that anybody who thinks that Shein is a good investment needs their head examining. Mm-hmm. Because just as ASOS went from nothing to a 5, 6, 7, 9 billion valuation and is now valued at 400 million. Boohoo went to a 5 billion valuation, is now valued at 450 million. If you think that Shein will do something radically different that will insulate them from the next version of this, which is faster and cheaper and with deeper pockets, you're mad. Because history tells us that it will not be the case. So not only is Shein, the most breathtaking statistic about Shein, and this is in the book, is that in 2022, Shein turned over $1 billion in the UK with 14 staff. How much money is going into our economy from us buying Shein? The answer is some VAT, but bugger all else.
I think there's a tax loophole, isn't it, because of the way that they fly it in?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Almost
so
certainly.
Probably,
but
yeah.
That business, shopping with that business, is of no value to us at all, and in fact is arguably the opposite. The idea that people investing in Shein on the London Stock Exchange will lose money first. They might make a bit if they get out at the right time. They'll probably make some money, but in the end, a lot of people will lose their shirts on this business. So the idea that our government is running around trying to court what is arguably one of the most problematic businesses on the planet, I think, is bananas. And France have got it right, in my opinion. That is not the way to increase the economic well-being of this country.
So on brand, though, for that. But anyway, I'm going to take one more killer question. I don't know which to choose.
I think the lady with the pink has had her hand up
Oh,
for
sorry,
longer.
yeah.
Sorry.
Thank you so much.
Sorry. Maybe she'll be quick. And then we'll
Thank you, thank you. Huge fan. The thing about the waste exports, do you believe it? Is it true? And if so, where are all those clothes going?
Well, they're not. I mean, no, I absolutely believe it's true. I mean, this is
Do
the man
you?
who. This is the man.
This is
the
great.
man who told me
It's
it
great.
was
It's breaking
the man.
news.
I mean, it was when I heard it last year. I was pretty stunned because it's a bit like the way we ship our recycling to the Philippines. There was that story about a container ship full of our rubbish that was on its way, and the Philippines said, "Nah, we've had enough of that," and now it's got nowhere to go. I don't know where that particular ship full of.
I mean, it does happen. Sorry, I wrote a book on plastic, so I know a lot about the National Sword Programme when China stopped taking our plastic waste. So a lot of these clothes are plastic, so, they are arguably plastic waste as well. I think this explains why we're seeing stuff like the Atacama Desert and stuff like that, novel regions. They'll find somewhere for it to be
They'll dump it somewhere.
dumped.
They just will find somebody who will take it and dump it. But, yeah, it used to be that we had an out for all this stuff. There was somewhere, but, there's another statistic that's in the book that I actually I mentioned on Sewing Bee about 4 years ago. And a researcher at Holloway had sat and done a really simple calculation, and he had worked out that there was enough clothing on the planet already to clothe the next 6 generations.
Oh, that's
of the
amazing,
human
that
race.
statistic.
But actually, that was about 5 years ago. I think he told me that, and I can't remember. It was on Sewing Bee a few years ago. Since then, we, the global clothing economy, have produced another 500 billion pieces of clothing. We're producing about 100 billion a year. Another 5 years at 100 billion a year is 500 billion bits of clothing, and we keep on making more. And so there's enough clothing on the planet for, I don't know, we'll be gone by the time we get through it all. I mean, it's like there is so much of this stuff, and we have no idea what to do with it.
And then we get into this sort of area where we go, well, let's get some enzymes that can eat the plastic and we'll just deploy them on it and it'll be fine. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. Listen, we must leave it there because you have got to sign some books. There we go.
You've got to buy some books, sadly, as well, because you're not leaving.
He won't sign them if you don't buy them because that's like, Thank you so much. I cannot say enough that you need this book in your weaponry, in your arsenal. Thank you so much, Patrick, for speaking to us, and thank you for coming, and thank you for your brilliant questions. Round of applause for Patrick Grant, please. Thank you.